It's time to sing a song for the unsung heroes. Let's all stand up tall and sing it loud. Let's all sing a song for the unsung heroes. And when we're through, there will be no doubt. Sing it for the ones that didn't make it, and sing it for the ones who live to tell. Sing it for the doctors and the nurses, and the corpsmen who witnessed living hell. We'll sing it for the ones who flew the chopper. Sing it for the ones who flew the jets. Let's make sure that we all remember, 'cause the price they pay is too much to forget. So let's all sing a song for the unsung heroes. Let's all stand up tall and sing it loud. Let's all sing a song for the unsung heroes. And when we're through, there will be no doubt. Let's all sing a song for the unsung heroes. Let's all stand up tall and sing it loud. Let's all sing a song for the unsung heroes. And when we're through, there will be no doubt. And when we're through, there will be no doubt. Let's all sing a song for the unsung heroes. Let's all stand up tall and sing it loud. Let's all sing a song for the unsung heroes. Let's all stand up tall and sing it loud. Let's all sing a song for the unsung heroes. Let's all stand up tall and sing it loud.
VVMF's In Memory program honors those who served in Vietnam, returned home, and later died. Each year, the weekend of Father's Day, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund hosts a special ceremony overlooking the wall in Washington, D.C., when we induct new honorees into the In Memory Honor Roll. Because of the pandemic, we had to delay our induction for our 2020 and 2021 honorees until a later date, and we're eager to welcome families and friends to the wall for that special ceremony later this year. One other special thing we usually do during In Memory Weekend is a reading of the names of all past honorees. While we won't be together at the wall this weekend, the VVMF staff and a small group of dedicated volunteers can still honor your loved ones through this virtual reading of the names. We'll read the names of all past honorees alphabetically by year of death. This reading will not include the 2020 or 2021 honorees, as the reading of their names will be done by friends and family at the ceremony later this year. We ask your forgiveness for any mispronounced names. Know that we're doing our best to honor and remember your loved ones.
A. Peter Dewey, Wallace Buford, James McGovern,
James Arsenault, Jackson Findling, Jackie Young, Henry Biernacki, Douglas Hoff, James Johnston, George Now, Leo Rowenhorst, James Tate, Joseph Frew, David Agnew, Joseph Craig, James Powell, William Breon, Michael Palmieri, Donald Remington, David Walsh, Douglas Webster, Jimmy Wilson.
Ralph Barzano, Johnny Bowers, Norman Bowers, James Edwards, Stanley Hudson, John Lyons, Wayne Meacham, Stefan Perry, Jerry Degnan, Stephen Dongus, Dennis I., Albert Jones, Robert Crisco, Carol Pender, James Reeder, Carol Wilkie, Merle Bissell, Donald Cook, James Franks, Robert Harvey, Stephen Jones, John Ledoux, Kenneth McGuire, Michael Murphy, James Norman, Keith Reeder, Larry Smalling, Donald Stebbins, Vincent Ursillo, Herman Vollmer,
Robert Ayers, Francis Cadwalter, Frank Grimes, Raymond Iwanski, Edward Coletta, Charles Koppel, William Linton, Theodore Lopez, Gary Peel, John Pententi, Raymond Reish, Kenneth Roberts, Andrew Sharp, Harry Shoup, Raymond Takelet, Robert Taylor, Roger Taylor, Charles Villon, William Wall, John Whitson, Daniel Wiggins,
William Bates, William Beaver, Henry Driver, Alan Gehring, William Heady, Jerry Holder, James Jansen, Stanley Johnson, Vincent Kelly, Virginia Kirsch, Kenneth Lamphere, Philip Lawing, Michael Marodison, Erwin Mayer, Bernard McGarvey, Henry Moore, Walter Moore, James Murray, Harry Nez, Lori O'Neill, John Patton, Richard Post, Terrence Reynolds, James Sanders, Paul Scott, Yeno Tuboli, Francis Turney, Frank Welter, William Wheeler, Dennis Williams, John Zedema,
Walter Almgreen, Paul Baltzel, Ronald Becker, John Blackburn, Timothy Cannon, Andrew Caudell, Richard Gonzalez, Vital Lemontin, James Lewis, Frank Lewis, James McWilliams, James Millen, Francisco Morales, Kenneth Nichols, Mike Quirk, James Roos, Leon Sangstock, Ernest Simpson, Raymond Sinclair, Stephen Succomelli, Marshall Swain, Forrest Wolfname,
Vincent Banda, John Bauer, John Boringer, Thomas Code, Charles Curtis, Joel Goodall, Alan Hurd, William Jones, William Larson, John Lucerne, Pete Lujan, Henry Mesa, Thomas Nichols, Robert Noel, James Otto, James Rattery,
Gary Reed, Wallace Schmidt, Frank Schneider, James Turnbull, Edward Van Slyke, Michael Wakefield, Tommy Wilson, Jerome Yeager, Robert Zellinger,
William Bates, Gabriel Bathory, Robert Carley, William Dimmel, Francis Duffy, Robert Flynn, James Fernie, Philip Geets, Paul Gladden, Ronald Goodwin, Harlan Graybull, Roger Gunning, Richard Hall, Theodore Hall, Byron Hall, Sylvester Kennedy, Donald Kunsel, Kenneth Lauritsen, David Lemieux, Frank Mikas, Joseph Mudd, Cletus Rooney, Gerald Schroers, Joseph Snyder, Edward Steiger, William Trott, Lyle Weatherwax, Harold Wicke, George Wildridge, Melvin Wright,
Carl Berglund, Thomas Drudy, Dennis Edwards, William Fisher, Paul Glass, John Hatuni, Paul Henson, Franklin Hill, Joseph Jacobs, Paul Kane, Sheldon Klink, Robert Malakowski, Charles Massey, Charles Phelan, James Pope, Conrad Rondeau, Thomas Stanton, Ernest Stedman, William Stewart, Douglas Sulak, William Turk,
Richard Allen, Gene Breeding, Clark Chamberlain, Theodosius Davis, George Flannery, John Garber, Leonard Gounod, Frank Guzzi, Richard Larson, Melvin Mellum, William Noah, David Peets, Billy Piercy, John Schneider, Bobby Singley, William Sliva, John Williamson, Kenneth Wonnacott,
Albert Auberton, Robert DeMulemeester, Dallas Dixon, James Fluck, Wenceslas Grace, Glenn Hockaday, John Justice, Robert Kennedy, John Larkin, Jack Madison, Donald Mason, Howard McCormick, Brian Mueller, William Mitchell, Richard Morrow, William O'Connell, Robert Owen, Anthony Peters, Stephen Purchase, Randolph Rohn, Philip Rochester, Carl Ropos, Roy Shepard, William Siegel, Gary Smith, Howard Wendell, Jay Wolverton, David Young,
Donald Baird, Paul Boger, Terry Bowles, Dennis Brask, Larry Frank, David Freer, James Gillespie, Kermit Hibner, Harry Hurst, Richard Kilbourne, David Lewis, Ronald Martin, William Palmer, Michael Parrott, Dominic Rotolo, Michael Ruzak, Frank Searles Jr., David Tout, Shirley Watson, Stephen Wedding, Sammy Weinstock,
Nils Anderson, John Bazin, Harold Bergstrom, Walter Brennan, Russell Dalton, Edward Duffy, Thomas Fortunato, Robert Grass, Gary Hammond, Gregory Hoffmeister, Warren Jackson, Michael Jameson, Robert Kofed, Frank Koller, Joseph Craddockville, David Lorette, James Patton, Gary Peck, Douglas Pickle, Robert Pierce, Kevin Renegon, John Rogan, Charles Cernett, Jeffrey Zimbrecki,
Charles Ackley, Kevin Baudreau, William Borden, William Brown, James Bazell, Adolph Seha, Richard Curcio, George Draper, Daniel Drury, Stephen Eldridge, Lawrence Flanagan, Thomas Garbarino, Edward Green, Gerald Hattier, Henry Haggerty, Ronald Kingsley,
Charles Larson, Hubert Merkerson Jr., Anthony Minutolo, Michael Rogers, John Rolls, Neil Ruick, David Sheffers, George Shirley, David Smith, Paul Spitaleri, Daniel Stork, Leslie Weisberg, Raymond Whitby, Charles White, Michael Yelka.
Glenn Adams, Reginald Benet, Henry Brown, Kenneth Buck, Paul Carroll, Devon Kripe, Richard Delaney, John Fayola, Joseph Harvin, Paul Hensley, James Hinton, Charles King, Anthony Long, John Marbury, Stephen Martin, Melvin Osler, Ronnie Price, William Stana, James Stark, Roy Swanson, John Toole, William Wallace, William Waters, Richard Webb.
Edward Bergseth, Ronald Bernhardy, Halford Bishop, Paul Brady, John Burr, Michael Carolyn, Pasquale Ciuca, Glenn Crandall, Anthony DeMella, John Dole, Albert Fidalye, George Garcia, David Grimley, Wilbur Gunzelman, Larry Hall, Gerald Hyman. John Johnston, William Joyner, Ernest Cower, Dennis Lians, Vincent Leogrand, Richard Markowitz, Lowell Meacham, James McCall, Paul Paulette Jr., Wayne Paulise, Richard Roskolb, Ricky Ray, Terry Remitz, Terry Strasco, Donald Trent, Robert Volminick. Milton Wood.
Eric Anderson, Robert Banaszak, Robert Boley, John Brooks, Norman Collins, Robert Farmer, Robert Gerling, Lawrence Glonek, John Gorman, Leonard Gravino, Cheryl Guillory, Arvo Hecula, Daniel Kane, David Lake, Ellsworth Little, Harry Mackle Jr., Harold Meese, Ralph Metcalf, Patrick Michael, David Mix, Stanley Moody, Daniel Morrison, Arthur Oft, Michael Otto, David Pellegrin, Eric Peterson, James Price, Emil Radis, Fred Roberto, Glenn Rogers, Kenneth Seaman, John Smith, John Snyder, Rajput Sukta Singh, Leslie Vietz.
John Anuswick, Gary Barton, Francis Brooks, Robert Brown, Dennis Buckaloo, Joseph Butler, Roger Courtney, David Coville, James Craig, Alan Davenport, Michael Duffy, Kenneth Ewing, John Fulgham, Robert Gautier, Jimmy Gilbert, William Granat, George Harrelson, James Hill, Neil Hintz, Norman Hughes, Robert Jark, George Johnson III, Stephen Kelly, Charles Kent, Paul Killian, Joseph Konecki, Nicholas Latona, John Maloney, Stephen Marquardt, Thomas McCloskey, Nicholas Meskia, Stephen Pitts, Donald Robertson, Dennis Rudolph, John Schwartz, Thomas Sizer, Timothy Stokowski, Robert Steele, Jesus Trujillo, Harry Walker, Kim Winter,
David Anderson, Donald Austin, Thomas Balliet, Omar Burlin, James Clark, Charles Clark, Nicholas Codd, Harold Conger, Harry Corsetti, Terence Fairchild, James Foyle, George Godfrey, Keith Halda, Heath Hill, Robert Hulskamp, Donald James, John Jinjachik, Russell Liebendorfer, Robert McClendon, William Monahan, Robert Uten, Alvin Owen, Larry Parr, Gerald Picard, Wesley Place, Edwin Reed, William Seidel, George Shannon, Donald Shipley, Hugh Smith, Ronald Sokolovich, Kenneth Taylor, Ralph Thusen, Joseph Williams, Władysław Zervalek,
Robert Aldrich, Dewey Allen, James Asante, Christopher Balser, Ronald Ball, Jerry Barlow, Donald Bell, David Bowley, William Cassell, Robert Chase, William Bill Cooney, Michael DeCamp, Raymond DeThorne, Larry Dodd, Paul Duffy, J.D. Eagle, Daniel Elston, Robert Ferguson, Carl Fields, Jake Foster, Anthony Foster, Alan Frank, Darrell Carl, Louis Kelso, Lamont Moody, Robert Newell, Eric Olasuski, Robert Oliva, Robert Overacre, Dean Phillips, Kenneth Rakowski, Thomas Rice, Clifton Richard, Odie Richardson, Lee Stark, Franklin Stewart, Gary Taku, John Von Hack, Robert Wagoner, Alvin Walker, Thomas White, Leonard Zinda,
Everett Avery, Wayne Bachtel, John Beardsley, Ronald Bogert, Fred Brooks, Robert Bullard, James Cozier, John Davis, Joseph Friedman, Andrew Govito, Michael Grenier, Robert Hamilton, Margaret Haskins Rose, Roy Hayes, Arthur Hinch, Terrence Kemp, John Kowalczyk, James Lavis, James Miller, Donald Mills, James Mitchell, Robert Murphy, Nicholas Posamonte, Jimmy Pugh, Eddie Perky, Douglas Riggs, Roman Serrano, William Smeal, Randy Spurlock, Victor Stoneburner, John Taylor, Donnell Toomey, James Waldron, Thomas Walton, Fred Wolfson, William Wood,
Michael Akins, Constantine Albans, Richard Austin, Arthur Boivin, Thomas Bush, Glenn Butler, Andrew Cook, Charles Copeland, Daniel Darrington, Joseph Ferenz, Richard Freeman, Wayne Funai, Frank Gallardo, Jerry Goff, Thomas Hall, Wilfred Hustad. Stephen Henney, Robert Kennedy, George Land, John Laser, David Malden, Daniel McGinley, Carl Nation, Harry Newitt, Stephen O'Reilly, James Ott, Kagi Parnell, Ricky Peterson, James Porter, Edwin Rose, William Rippeth, James Rivard, Harrison Robinson, Joseph Ruggiero, George Sanford, Stephen Shockley, Kenneth Shreves, Stephen Steins, Jimmy Stepp, Travis Sullivan, Kenneth Thompson, Robert Valentine, Daniel Vasquez, Walter Vitour, Robert Vredenberg, Robert Watkins, Joseph Wise.
Michael Barnhill, Kenneth Binash, Edwin Blyler, Natzio Bonina, Ronald Brown, Emile Charbonneau, Andrew Davies, Alan Eitel, Frederick Fogel, James Franklin, William Gard, John Gibson, James Gift, Richard Goebel, Willard Green, Andrew Grimes, Fred Harnd, Ronald Kiersmakers, Dennis Kramer, William Latour, John Henry Lunn, James McCauley, Daniel Marland, Robert Maslowski, David McCormick, Randy McNeese, Barry McQuaid, Raymond Mello, Terrence Marinek, Stephen Mitchell, Carl Most, James Murphy.
Clifford Phillips, Royce Purcell, Michael Rossler, Michael Ruberti, Vernon Sherv, Harold Shoemaker, William Short, John Smith, Robert Stogdale, Stefan Svets, Herschel Tanner, Jerry Venete, Michael Walsh, William Watkinson, Jay Weschler, John Wheatley, Gary Wolfe, Stanley Yates, Earl Young, Elmo Zumwalt,
Edwin Ager, Robert Badger, Harry Bowman, Walter Bell, Charles Blackham, William Bowles, Richard Brown, Calvin Brown, Carl Caldwell, Stuart Carlin, Suzanne Cisco, Hildra Kreis, Dennis Dickerson, Jimmy Dudley, Unirice Duncan, Robert Freeman, Richard Fryer, Michael Gall, Miles Graff, Harold Hammer, James Hine, Robert Hill, Robert Hollis, Carrie Jacks, Harvey Jett, Ned Johnson, Robert Johnson, Raymond Judish, Chester June, Robert Kerr, Dale King, John Clemick,
James Lang, Randy Langworthy, Gerald Lefevre, John Lenardi, Daryl Marcus, Robert Matusik, Bernard McLean, Jerry McCord, Willard Mitchell, Eugene Monin, William Nicholson, Patrick O'Donnell, Francisco Pedron, Alan Parr, William Pletcher, Stephen Ray, Vincent Rabocus, Dennis Rice, George Charlau, Robert Shanahan, David Smith, William Stetham, Ernest Taylor, William Thomas, Jesse Wilson.
Michael Ackerman, Thomas Alexander, Troy Baker, Charles Bales, Stephen Barnes, Leonard Beaudry, Kenneth Blair, Raymond Beaujolais, James Book, Ronald Bing, Joseph Campbell, Robert Chastek, John Clark, Eugene Corbett, James Cox, Gary Deal, David Dotson, Herman Downs, Raymond Driver, William Dudenbostel, Jay Erickson, Wayne Frank, Daniel Gear, Roger Hamill, John Henson, Paul Hoffman, Alvis Holtmeyer, Michael Husick, Robert Jackson, Donald Jacobs, Robert Yeager, Robert Johnson,
Noel Johnson, Thomas Jones, George Justice, Merle Kane, Thomas Keeg, William Keese, Bernard Kliss, Jack Manley, Jerry McAvoy, Robert McElhaney, James Merrill, Ross Moray, John Muir, Kevin Murphy, Edward Norman, Howard Norton, Albert Patton, Hubert Peed, Leonard Polakov, Clarence Rust, Ronald Sackey, Craig Scott, John Simon, Donald Talberg, David Tangeman, Ronald Tasted, Alfred Terrian, Joseph Thome, Brian Tinimus, Anthony Velez, Billy Von Weldon, Ronald Von Sergen, Daniel Watkins, Gary Wisner, John Wooten.
Charles Abbott, Warren Barnes, Walter Barrick, Lynn Becker, David Blassingame, Denman Blissard, Douglas Buchan, Richard Cardinal, Leo Cawley, Vincent Chitrin, Richard Cogdall, Michael Creamer, Stephen Croucher, Thomas Daly, Harry Davison, Christopher Delafleur, Richard Deneen, James Dunlap, Donnie Erickson, John Evans, Anthony Falsiglia, Oscar Fincher, Richard Fransky, Keith Freiberger, Walter Griffin, Stephen Grimm, Charles Gwiff, Robert Hamill, Joseph Heath, Raymond Hicks, Steve Horowitz, Keith Hussell,
Daniel Iliff, Anthony Janusik, Gary Johnson, Harold Kelly, Joey Kuhn, Salvatore Lafata, Frank Lee, Horace Levy, Stephen Lewin, Charles Lundy, Robert Lutz, James McPoyle, John Messer, Vernon Metcalf, Langford Metzger, Mike Miller, David Montgomery, Warren Peterson, Thomas Pobans, William Poole, Stephen Ray, Roy Rascon, Harold Rice, William Roach, Mark Roth, Joseph Rousseau, Dennis Roxbury, Henry Schroeder, Seth Sleezer, Jack Spicer, Charles Terry, Carl Feller, Raymond Van Ness, John Wade, Norman Wright, Ernest Wright, Dennis Zahn,
Glenn Alexander, James Alway, Dale Bailey, James Baltras, Michael Buda, Larry Butts, Harlan Butts, Stanley Casper, John Chess, John Coder, Thomas Deere, James Duff, Russell Elderbaum, William Irby, Edward Evans, Raymond Feltz. Jack Fontenay, Frank Forte, Dennis Geary, Gary Gray, Roger Greer, Patrick Gwynn, Harold Harding, Johnny Harris, Larry Hatcher, William Hewitt, Joseph Hilliard, Delbert Hobbs, Eric Johnson, Darrell Kilser, Gregory Koch, Kenneth Lucas.
Jesse Mathis, Gerald McCullum, Charles McIntyre, Fred Metting, Robin Miller, James Miller, Donald Poffenroth, Michael Radick, Ronald Reinker, Stanley Roberts, Joseph Rodriguez, David Rowe, Elroy Schultz, Peter Scursatone, James Sousa, Gerald Swiggett, Victor Tanner, Thomas Thomas, Raymond Wallander, Leonard Warnecke, William Watland, Larry Wenkel, Louis Westerberg, Harry White, Michael White.
Preston Allen, Nels Anderson, Gerald Baker, Wilbur Ballard, Ted Balliet, John Baranowski, John Bolas, William Borer, Norman Bowden, John Bresla, Robert Britt, Clifford Brown, Frank Cambron, Larry Carter, Estelle Caudill, James Clark, Elias Cordova, John Crow, Davidson Crumling, James Colty, William Cullen, Robert Cup McKenna, Thomas Cusick, Daniel Dolbo, Johnny Downey, Harold Durant, Frank Deisler, Gerald Edmonds, George Emery, Edward Erkinger, William Farrow, Kenneth Fuel,
James Fisher, Bruce Fosberg, William Janelli, Frank Gonzalez, Gary Granger, Noel Hull, Jack Hedglen, Lee Hefner, Ruben Hernandez, Edmund Hoban, Ralphie Hoffman, James Hoffman, Ben Howard, Donald Howland, David Duran, James Kikades,
Gregory Rasmussen, Robert Reed, Lauren Roberts, Robin Rogers, James Rogers, Eugene Rooney, Edgar Rose, Kevin Rosinski, Ronald Savage, William Surratt, Edward Sheldon, James Sides, James Simpson, Stephen Smith, Robert Smith, John Stowe, Clyde Sweeney, David Taylor, Ronald Thompson, Ronald Volk, Timothy Wallace, Larry Waltrip, Joseph Weber, Michael Edzina, Lyle Wieland, James West, Richard Sepukover,
Larry Abbott, Milo Adams, Jesse Adams, Gus Anestes, Dennis Ashby, Kenneth Atkinson, Robert Austin, Douglas Babcock, Jesse Baez, Jerry Bascom, Stephen Belville, James Bennett, Russell Benton, Class Berg, Dale Brandon, Francis Bramlett, Russell Brannon, Henry Brawley, John Brentlinger, Earl Bryant, Thomas Burbrink, Dennis Campbell, Gary Campbell, Jeffrey Carmody, James Chapman, Robert Sharon, John Christensen, Ray Clark, Charles Clark, Paul Clausen, Bruce Cole, Edward Collingsworth.
Travis Connolly, Joel Cook, Michael Corcoran, Charles Davis, Harold Denny, Frank Derbyshire, Frederick Delmuth, James Downey, Donald Dunn, Richard Eckhart, Thomas Elliott, Norman Farr, Samuel Fetchel, Don Finn, James Flo, Thomas Frank, Franklin Freshour, Edward Gillen, Dale Giray, James Good, Francis Gould, Kenneth Goulvine, James Gray, Paul Gulliver, James Haas, Michael Hake, Donald Hark, Donald Harrison, Gary Hasselbeck, Hubert Hatcher, Thomas Hazard, George Himmelberger,
Douglas Hofel, Earl Hofstede, Eddie Holder, John Carlin Hollander, Lloyd Hood Jr., Louis Hoskins, Stephen Hunt, Dennis Hunter, Darrell Jensen, Thomas Johnson, Garland Jolly, Carl Kerr, Paul Kidder, Raymond King, Harold Kaiser, Gregory Klein,
Daniel Labarge, Michael Landisman, Simone Lazara, William Lenander, James Leitz, Gary Lestrani, Lance Lockhart, Alvin Long, David Ludwig, Donald Messia, Gerald Maddox, Gerald Madsen, Louis Mara, James McClary, John McCullough, Lee McDonald,
David McElhaney, Carrie McFarland, Jimmy Miller, Ramon Mills, Joseph Miser, Roscoe Mitchell, Robert Montgomery, Paul Moran, Dennis Morgan, Wayne Morris, Joseph Mulhare, Justin Molnick, Alan Murphy, Francis Murphy, Leon Nichols, Brian O'Connor, John Oliver, Charles Orndorff, Bruce Pascal, Jackie Patterson, Louis Puller, Christopher Radke, Robert Reher, John Reed, James Rigdon, Terry Rosenberger, Michael Sanford, Paul Surratt, Raymond Schmid, Courtney Schroen, James Shugart, Rodney Simmons,
Robert Simon, Roger Schmidtkel, Jerome Spaeth, Dennis Starr, Randall Stefan, Daryl Thompson, Robert Treble, Wiley Tripp, Dennis Troughton, Bert Twiggs, Eugene Watton, Troy Wicker, Victor Vietersburg, William Williams, Michael Willis, Charles Wilson, Charles Winquest, George Henry Wise, Michael Woods, John Yates,
William Anderson, Michael Anderson, James Anglin, John Arkenberg, David Babbitt, Wayne Barfield, David Beatty, Wayne Bergquist, Larry Bilyeu, Philip Brennigan, John Burdett, David Cale, Charlie Carter, Charles Chafin, Wayne Chesser, Vincent Ciampini, Arvel Klaba, Harvey Corey, Anthony Davis, Gerald Dominski, Jimmy Elliott, Richard Ingleson, Roderick Fast, Ronald Fain, Kenneth Fish, Dixon Fletcher, Robert Fry, Gennaro Fumando, Donald George, Francis Giaimo, John Giolorowski, Timothy Gilmore,
John Gregory, Gregory Hairston, Lannon Hart, John Henshaw, Francis Hoke, Fred Johnson, Theodore Johnson, Michael Johnson, Melvin Johnson, John King, Alan Knapp, Marvin Lucan, Thomas Madsen, Eric Mayertz, Paul Mayu, Sidney Marks, Michael McBurnett, Michael McLean, James Mellott, David Millett, Richard Montoro, Robert Moriarty, Timothy Nelson, David Newhouse, Stephen Olson, Robert Oxley, James Peters, Ernest Pierce, Bobby Pierce, Robert Pope, Arthur Puderbaugh, Perry Randall,
Barry Reddington, Michael Reynolds, Paul Richardson, Charlie Rose, Stephen Schilling, Arland Shepard, Clifton Sherrod, Thomas Sneed, Frank Stevens, Alan Stern, John Stewart, John Terrace, Thomas Thompson, Robert Trigger, Keith Vandegrift, Ralph Vaughn, Wayne Wardwell, Edward Wasserman, David Witt, Arnold Wilkins, Ronald Wilson, Dale Wilson, Charlie Winchester, John Yandell, John Ehlers, Clyde Ashley, William Baker, James Brown, Bobby Bunton, Kelly Burke, James Calden, Earl Canup, James Carpenter, Stephen Cook, Henry Copeland, Dale Corwin, Harold Cox, Donald Cunningham, Milton Deese, Larry Dixon, Donald Dolsky, Marvin Dernan, Howard Eady, David Eaton, Robert Edrington, Jerry Everhart, Brian Eversman, Michael Fell, Gerald Garcia, Laverne Geiger, Olin Gill, Thomas Greenberg, Gerald Grismala, John Hamilton, Thomas Hartsook, James Hefner,
Charles Higginbotham, Gary Hill, James Jennings, John Jensen, Hezekiah Johnson, Malcolm Jones, Michael Jump, Michael Karch, Stephen Kelso, William Kiefer, Donald Keeman, Larry Kincaid, Dudley Knapp, Peter Cross, Robert Lasko, Paul Lieberman, Howard Lobato, Richard Mack, Fred Mansky, Gary Markle, Frank Martinez, Joseph McMahon, Juan Medina, Patrick Montana, Keith Moriarty, John Morris, Scott Morris, Richard Mueller, James Murphy, Michael Murphy, John Natello, Henry Nieto,
John Noss, Alexander Ogrins, Robert Oshesky, Sammy Pentecost, Thomas Phillips, Charles Pitchford, Ronald Pistawa, Robert Ratcliffe, Johnny Robbins, Marion Robinson, Kenneth Romer, Richard Rogers, James Royal, Thomas Schurkenglost, Gary Sendek, Edward Silikowski, Ross Snare, John Soxey, Michael St. Germain, George Swearingen, Gary Taggart, Paul Tatum, Richard Tolley, William Toner, Clifford Walters, Clayton Williams, Richard Yopek, John Zell.
James Alexander, Robert Angus, Carl Owell, Mark Barber, David Bartlett, Christopher Benedict, Jimmy Bradley, Alan Bryant, Thomas Burgess, William Burke, Brian Burke, Robert Calvert, Gary Costello, Mark Cow, Frank Cross, Dominic DeGregorio, Thomas Doobie, Terrell Elliott, Jimmy Fine, Michael Fuhr, John Frith, Theodore Frost, Joseph Gallo, Thomas George, Thomas Gillespie, Louis Gordon, Robert Hanover, Jeffrey Hansen, Wallace Henderson, Charles Hensley, Clifford Herman, Franklin Hinson.
Preston Hicks, Louis Hofner, Richard Hoko, Truman Johnson, Scotty Kelly, Charles Kearns, Robert Canan, John Klein, Harold Kostan, John Kwiatkowski, Stanley Larson, Jimmy Little, Larry Matz, Peter McCulley, George McClellan, John Meyer. Gary Moser, William Mostrofis, John Murphy, Donald Nickel, James O'Donnell, Donald Parker, Salvatore Petronico, Thomas Perry, John Peterson, Francisco Premiani, James Rhine, Marvin Robinson, Joseph Rogasic, Michael Sager, Ronald Schwegart, Billy Shepard, Roy Seaford, Roy Smith, William Smith, William Stolarczyk, Roger Stone, Harley Surritt, Wayne Swinson, Glenn Thorson, Carl White, Eddie White, Curtis Wilkerson, Patrick Wright, Anthony Zavarelli,
Forney Ballard, Larry Bartell, Richard Barth, Percy Bates, Albert Boutwell, Alan Boyd, Dennis Brady, Richard Bright, Thomas Burbridge, Robert Burton, Warren Capel, Anthony Garcia, John Casey, George Chandler, William Clark, Claude Connor, James Conroy, Richard Contreras, David Conway, Donald Creamer, William Dean, Gregory Demiduk, William Fennell, John Fazer, William Franklin, Keith Galloway, Willard Garner, Dennis Gentner, Richard Gibson, Thomas Goodrich, Edward Graff, Mark Graham.
Elbury Haranchar, Homer Hayes, Kenneth Hegman, Robert Herschel, Norman Hinkle, Thomas Hockmeyer, Harold Howell, Phil Jackson, Roger Jodrey, Walter Jones, Weldon Keeman, John Kizilewski, Gerald Kleinberg, Johnny Cotala, Paul LaPierre, Ronald Lilly. Glenn Lloyd, James Manwaring, John Mattia Jr., William McCurdy, Randall McGill, Robert McIntosh, Kurt Miller, Thomas Mullen, David Nelson, Lee Newman, Harvey Norston, Lawrence Parsons, Charles Pettifish, William Pickett, Terry Perdue, Joseph Rashlick.
Antone Rosa, Gary Rossman, Richard Rung, Gordon Shore, Gail Skinner, Monte Smith, Charles Taylor, Thomas Thies, Walter Ticano, Francis Tracy, Roger Varholt, Esley Varvel, Joseph Weaver, Glenn Wessel, Christopher Wilkinson, Richard Williams, Emmanuel Williams, Ronald Doyle,
Robert Abraham, William Bacon, James Bailey, James Barber, Norman Bays, Richard Brecken, James Brown, William Burroughs, Harry Bouchard, Alan Butler, Edward Calderwood, Donald Caliendo, Lonnie Carter, Ronald Chapman, William Charlton, Warren Collins, Joseph Cornish, Richard Craig, Robert Douglas, Jacob Drager, Samuel Duncan, Roger East, Arnold Estes, James Begley, Robert Farrell, Adrian Fish, Ralph Ford, Arthur Fries, Erin Frost, Paul Geary, Robert George, Melvin Green,
Michael Gregorski, Patrick Hagens, Thomas Hanson, Randy Harold, Thomas Hybe, Henry Hoffman, Wilmer Eisenhower, Ronald Jennings, John Johnson, Donald Jones, Richard Kirkhope, John King, Keith Nepley, Marvin Corticos, Larry Cuker, David Lambiotti, Darrell Larson, James Marchbank, Jerry McCormick, Isaac McFadden, Paul McGrath, Richard McLaurin, Billy Moore, Mark Morin, Richard Morris, Jonathan Mutiner, Marvin Nestor, John Norton, Patrick O'Meara, Philip Patrick, Armando Pereles, Lionel Pinn,
Robert Podjerski, David Porter, Nelson Raschendorfer, Rodney Risch, Harold Rittenhouse, Larry Robinson, John Sadlowski, Caio Saleno, William Sawchek, Marvin C., George Shields, Donald Simon, Wilson Simpson, Dennis Slibby, Claude Smith, Tommy Sneed, Harold Sprague, Juan Villalobos, James Warrington, Delbert Watkins, Paul Westmoreland, Lawrence White, Frank Wilcox, James Wise, James Wright, William Zellner.
Jack Adams, George Barnett, Kenneth Bartow, Gary Bennett, Raymond Burling, Kenneth Billings, Timothy Bogenschultz, Harry Bohr, Charles Boyd, James Branch, Thomas Brennan, Robert Burke, Robert Burnett, Robert Calhoun, Frank Campanaro, Herbert Carty, Jimmy Carmichael, Ricardo Carmona, Ronald Carroll, Paul Castris, David Condren, Thomas Connors, Danny Conrad, Henry Covington, James Curry, Ronald Dallas, Gary David, Rudd Davis, Dennis Diebolt, David DeCourcy, William DeLoreal, Kenneth Dumel,
Nicholas Dudek, Donald Dumas, Bruce Engel, William England, Ralph Ennis, Marvin Erb, William Evans, John Evanson, Samuel Fitzpatrick, Derek Francis, Dwayne Gardner, Robert Gillis, John Gorak, Michael Green, George Haas, Virgil Hammond, Larry Harper, Jesse Hennig, Ronald Holter, Robert Howard, James Howley, Roger Hula, Evan Hutchick, Sesochi Isaacs, Thomas Jennings, Randall Jennings, Larry Johnson, Dean Johnson, Robert Kapinski, Colin Kelly, George Lamb Jr., Billy Lewis,
Ronald Lincoln, James Logan, Charles Lord, Michael Malachowski, Francis Mann, Van Martin, Grady Massengale, Barry MacArthur, Danny McCatty, Jack McMichael, Brian Meadows, Charles Meese, James Meeks, Raymond Mitchell, Harrison Morgan, John Mullen, Jerry Neff, Chris Nicholas, Ollie Nichols, Carl Nitch, Marvin Nolan, James Osborne, George Ottery, Richard Pachewski, Carl Peoples, John Post, John Ramsey, Wilford Ricard, William Shea, Frank Shelmett, Thomas Sela, Stephen Simpson,
Herbert Sink, Peter Smokowski, Sandy Snyder, Dennis Soldner, Michael Staub, Erwin Stander, Junior Stark, Thomas Swartz, Timothy Taylor, Lonnie Tiller, Gerald Tone, Robert Trask, Russell Vigliotti, Thomas Whaley, Delmer Williams, Otho Winchester, Raymond Wisniewski, Robert Zachrison,
George Adair, Frank Aguilar, Thomas Allen, Robert Antowiak, Arthur Bachman, Richard Baez, John Baird, Lawrence Bamberg, Gary Barth, Nicholas Bay, Robert Benzio, James Berger, Michael Block, Charles Borgstrom, William Borofsky, Peter Brose, James Burns, Jackie Carver, William Clark, Dennis Coble, Cecil Cook, Maurice Cooper, David Cornelius, Rennie Corey, Scott Craven, Sandy Crowder, William Curry, Davis Darbone, Clinton Dean, Stephen Decker, Michael Dillard, Gerald Dooley,
Thomas Dressel, Arthur Edwards, Dylan Fairburn, Peter Fargy, Roy Fuel, Armand Fleury, Frank Flocari, Robert Flynn, Charles Glenn, Pedro Gonzalez, William Green, Thomas Grossner, Dean Gunn, Ralph Gwynn, Donald Hagman, William Haney, Richard Hazeltine, Daniel Hill, Wayne Hiller, Michael Hoagland, Gary Inskeep, Arthur Jeffra, Terrell Johnson, David Johnson, John Joyce, Bernard Cleaterline, Herschel Knighton, Boleslav Koska, Joseph Kovac, William Cressley, Frederick Lance, Donald Lapagard.
Timothy Lejeune, Mark Leverton, Thomas Lee, Clarence Leverage, Charles Lewis, Donald Link, Terry Malone, George Martin, Richard McCowan, Walter Mealy, Robert Miner, William Mintler, Vincent Monticelli, Gerald Moore, Hal Murphy, Franklin Norris, Laird Osborne, Turner Owens, Daniel Papp, Charles Patnod, Thomas Perry, Charles Poole, Randall Prusacki, Jimmy Pyle, William Rangnow, Roger Ratzlaff, John Reinhardt, Woodrow Rentis Blanco, Stephen Rice, Richard Price, Jack Ritchie, Donald Rose,
Robert Salazar, John Schaefer, Gerald Schmitz, Max Searle, Louis Sellers, Thomas Sims, Marlon Smith, Ralph Smith, Carrie Smith, Jeffrey Smith, David Solich, Juan Soto, William Stafford, Don Stigler, Joseph Taylor, George Tideman, Robert Townsend, Aubrey Townsend, David Van Nort, Donald Waterman, James Weber, Eugene Weems, Gary Wolchek.
James Abbott, Floyd Abney, David Ackerman, Kenneth Atkins, Francis Amato, Angelo Amoroso, David Babb, Philip Badger, Ronald Baggett, Charles Bailey, Jerry Baker, Dennis Ballard, Robert Blanchard, Ralph Bolin, Walter Brady, Stanley Brinton, Linda Buckley, Charles Burnett, Russell Casadonte, James Cantanesi, Richard Clark, James Cordray, Lennis Corey, Michael Crawford, Charles Coulisson, Joseph Cunningham, Robert Dalton, Roger Davis, Lauren Davis, Edgar Day, Larry Dean, Robert Doughty,
John Dull, Truman Easterling, Ronald Ebersole, Ed Embry, Robert Erickson, Wayne Fairbairn, William Fairchild, Peter Farrell, Thomas Fitzgerald, Ralph Flanagan, Michael Ford, Jeffrey Fowler, Dean Fowler, Jack Frost, Joseph Gagliardo, Keith Geisler.
Anthony Gilmore, Gary Goodrich, George Grant, Norman Hardy, Argyle Harper, Dallas Harper, Roy Hebert, Ronald Hebert, James Henderson, Donald Henderson, Jack Henshaw, Mike Hickman, Robert Hilker, John Hiltner, Willard Hines, Charles Hohenstein,
James Hood, Lester Hoover, Robert Horvath, Robert Hughes, John Hughes, Dale Jepson, James Jones, Keith Jones, Thomas Joyce, Daniel Kelly, Truzel Kelly, Robert Kelsey, Jerry Kidwell, Ronnie Kraus, Joseph Krauska, Michael Larkin,
Quentin Larson, Paul Lawrence, Daniel Leach, Dennis Leslie, Donald Mann, Kenneth McCaskill, Robert McClure, Tommy McCamey, Louis McKinley, Douglas McNeese, Joseph Miasek, Donald Meyer, Jimmy Miller, Charles Miska, Eugene Moeller, David Moose.
Daniel Morrison, Gary Murphy, Donald Myers, Benjamin Navarro, Terry Nettlesky, Jonathan Nelson, Mark Niffenegger, Richard Newt, John O'Brien, John Olzanecki, Robert Pekoski, Alan Papasek, Andrew Papp, Stephen Parker, Lester Payton, Carl Peterson, Deward Pokorny, Frederick Pausiak, Joseph Cortusio, Edward Crier, William Raybould, John Regan, Charles Rader, Michael Ricks, James Robinson, Donald Romer, Chester Salvia, Dominic Chavone, Thomas Ledlasek, Stephen Sirek, John Shepard,
Marvin Smith, Gary Smith, Billy Smith, Kenneth Smith Peters, Dennis Starzinger, Jesse Stevens, William Stone, Woodland Styron, Max Suggs, Donald Teague, David Thompson, Dallas Tudor, Eugene Turner, Henry Utterback, Daniel Walker, Clarence Wenridge. Roger Williams, Dale Williams, Woodrow Wilson, Gerald Wilson, Timothy Woods, Jonas Worsham, Alvin Wubbles, George Zabilka.
Agapito Alvarez, Roy Antonini, George Arsenault, Stephen Atchley, Larry Auerbach, David Barkovic, Leo Barnaby, George Beck, George Bennett, Lloyd Benton, Charles Billings, Lucianne Boylston, Dennis Brooks, Jimmy Bullock, Robert Burkhart, Leslie Burr, Stephen Campbell, William Cannon, Robert Kaplan, Donnie Chasteen, Carl Christie, James Cowles, John Cruz, John Curry, Howard Cusick, Cecil Daniels, Paul Davis, Michael Davis, Dennis DeJewel, William Desmond, William Daling, Michael Duff,
John Elm, Terry Evans, Terry Farmer, Larry Faulkner, Richard Feistemel, Dixon Farron, Richard Frankowiak, Donald Gannon, Kerry Garner, Alan Gatesman, Robert Grace, John Groff, Thomas Grassa, Henry Gregg, Julius Harding, Michael Hargis.
Samuel Hatton, Richard Hatzenbuehler, Alan Hodgson, John Hogan, Thomas Holland, Hassel Holt, Levi Horn, Ronald Howard, Gregory Jazarian, Thomas Johnson, Timothy Kazmiski, Thomas Kelly, John King, Tommy King, Thomas Kingen, Alan Kurtz,
Daniel Kuttner, Michael Kuzmicki, Billy Leach, Adam Legg, James Lorenzo, Mark Lubrick, Robert Mocker, Calvin Mason, Robert Mitwinnie, Maynard Mayberry, Kevin McLaughlin, James McMaster, Bobby Muborn, Lawrence Moore, Daniel Moore, Jerome Moore, Frederick Morgan, James Morsey, Anthony Musto, Albert Noel, Julian Norris, Thomas O'Rourke, Henry Ochis, David Olivia, Calvin Ollis, Thomas Olson, Larry Osborne, Forrest Page, Gerald Peterson, Grant Pitcher, Timothy Plaskett, Raymond Pomeroy.
Edward Purcell, Louis Quick, Robert Quinn, Melvin Rebholz, John Register, David Riccio, Alfred Rittenhouse, Robert Robson, Robert Rogers, Donald Rose, Brian Russo, Richard Saylor, Elmer Sineri, Charles Shurtleff, Robert Simpson, Edward Smith, Michael Sokola, Lawrence South, Gerald Spath, Arnold Spitzer, Clifford Stearns, William Swartz, Lawrence Thompson, Donald Vasswing, Charles Vaughn, Michael Ward, James Warren, George Whiten, Charles Wicksburg, William Winter, Ronald Wright, George Young.
Lloyd Abel, Leo Allen, Keith Anderson, Mark Anderson, George Bartol, Denny Bennett, Paul Blosser, Jimmy Bradley, Edward Brannon, Dennis Brantz, David Brock, William Broxson, Peter Burkhart, Theodore Caruso, Roy Chambers, Fred Zimmerman, Stanley Clayman, John Clemens, Louis Cody, George Davis, Truzel Daramis, Neil Dixon, George Douglas, Robert Dudley, Russell Amen, David Eskew, Henry Ferris, Lowell Falconberry, Gary Fiduke, Ronald Faust, Walker Fox, Michael Frost.
Jeffrey Gardner, Danny Garland, David Gibson, Thomas Gray Sr., Robert Grossley, Francisco Gutierrez, John Hall, Charles Hancock, Ronald Harris, Michael Harris, Lehman Harris, Donald Hassler, William Hague, Brian Hill, Elmer Hogan, David Jones, Walter Jones, Dennis Kenk, Owen King, Paul Kirkman, William Klemick, Robert Krause, James Lawrence, Richard Legrand, Theodore Macris, Tommy Margaram, James McGinn, Robert McGuffin, Stephen Merrican, Paul Mitchell, Terry Mitchell, Adolfo Morales Melendez,
Jack Niedermeyer, Robert Orta, John Parisi, John Paul, Curtis Peterson, Edward Pitcher, Ira Pretty, Tommy Province, Kent Renbach, Juan Ruiz, Charles Russell, Johnny Salas, Jesus Salgado, Richard Santistevan, Michael Scott, Warren Seymour, Anthony Slomsky, Robert Spindler, Terry Tart, Lawrence Taylor, Kenneth Taylor, Roy Thomas, Terry Thompson, Frank Tenchner, Vincent Ungaro, Arthur Wade, William Wayrig, Leroy Weller, Donald Wells, Robert Williamson, Robert Wooldridge, Bernard Zaleski,
Ronald Anderson, Frank Balavage, William Bartow, Robert Beasley, Thomas B., Harold Boyce, Jack Bradley, Clifford Briggs, Kenneth Brunel, Richard Busili, Thomas Caposione, Samuel Cochran, Leslie Cottle, Richard Dalton, John Davila, Kevin Donahue, Richard Downs, Robert Duncan, Michael Erickson, Paul Facklum, Ronald Fabeek, Roger Ford, Jerry Foster, Richard Gentry, Donald Gauchner, Jerry Griffith, Jose Hurule, Don Hampton, Michael Harger, George Harris, Donald Havey, William Henline,
Thomas Hay, Rush Holton, Jarrett Huff, Dennis Husband, Robert Irwin, Joseph Kaler, Cameron Keister, Paul Kofsky, Roger Kohout, David Cortus Sr., Lloyd Krupp, Stanley Kukla, William McHale, Frank Miller, Gary Minkler, Clifford Miyashiro, Frank Moffett, Charles Morrow, Arvin Mortensen, William Morton, Harold Murphy, Todd Orman, Joseph Palante, Dean Pape, Craig Potswald, Peter Putrino, Raymond Reeves, Fred Richmond, John Rood, Gilbert Rowan, Charles Savage, Stephen Sequist,
Frank Siegfried, Ralph Slaughter, Garen Sparks, Dean Spence, Gregory Thayer, Dennis Thaman, Harrison Thompson, Keith Tiffany, Daniel Tomko, Larry Tremblay, Brian Van Washnova, Luther Wallace III, Russell Weber, Bruce Williams, Dale Williams, Larry Wine Sr., Francis Wing, Kenneth Weissman, James Yoshida,
Leon Atwater, David Atwood, Melvin Banthroll, Joseph Barnes, Glenn Beckwith, Harold Bentley, Roger Bernacki, Robert Bowser, Joseph Bird, Walter Chatham, Frederick Shoshone, Francis Collins, Thurman Kahn, George Cook, Frederick Copley, Terrence Donnick, Paul Dunn, Michael Engler, Elliot English, Darce Freeman, Harold Fuller, William Glantz, Brian Gunderson, Lawrence Hackett, William Hare, Charles Hull, Edward Pete Harrison, Florentino Herrera, Paul Herring, Charles Hubush, Walter Honeycutt III, Howard James Sr.,
Richard Johnson, William Jones, Donald Kleberline, James Killoran, William Kirk, Myron Legomarcino, James Lane, Max Leitz, Alan Logan, Robert Lyon, Paul McDonald, Daniel Mafredis, Edmund McGoldie, Eugene Marbeater, Jimmy McFarling, Joseph McGowan, John McKay, Albert McNeil Chambers, Billy McPherson, Ellis Meadows, Leslie Moon, Ronald Moore, William Morgan, Charles Mernon III, George Olenek, Charles Patton, Flory Perrone, Dennis Perry, Robert Petruska, Donald Pfeiffer, Alfred Ramirez, Richard Reimer,
Paul Riddlebarger, William Robinson, John Rodick, Roberto Romero, Eugene Rommel, Ronald Rose, Philip Saldivar, Robert Sanders, Ralph Salm, Ronald Shuck, Arthur Simmerd, Richard Simpson, Stan Sermons, Jeffrey Stanner, Jerome Stevens, Elliot Stewart, Joseph Summit, Robert Tate, John Taylor, Owen Tomlinson, Frank Verdon, Alvina West, Roderick Wills, Richard Whitwer, Douglas Young,
John Abbott, Dalton Alexander, Craig Anderson, Walter Anzac, Paul Bailey, Dennis Banks, John Barrett, Albert Beddard, Arthur Bialaskursky, Keith Blackman, Joseph Boback, James Breeden, Jerry Bergen, Walter Cameron, Everett Chadbourne, Ronald Clausen. Harold Coey, Dale Kokenauer, Richard Coulomb, Keith Curry, Michael Dirth, John Dell, David Dillon, Sean Doherty, Edwin Driscoll, Donald Duncan, William Duncan Jr., Carl Engel, Douglas Fawcett, Dennis Phelix Sr., John Fields, Jackson Garrettson.
Lonnie Garrison, Otis Glenn, Ronald Hagan, Alan Hale, Charles Harding, Donald Hedges, William Herman, Dennis Hickman, William Hightower, Patrick Hookill, William Jenkins, David Johnson, Charles Johnson, William Johnstone, Gerald Candelek, Jerome Kelch, James Kennedy, Charles Key, Arthur Kidney, Robert Konopka, Kirk Kremer, Leonard Lordy, Robert Lum, Walter Lunsford, Daniel Maloney, Gary Marty, Gerald Martick, John Martinez, William Massey, Paul Mon, Charles McAnally, David McKeown.
Gerard McManus, Gary Meadows, Joseph Michaud, William Mierzejewski, Richard Moore, David Morris, Frank John Mulenickle, Willard Murray, Robert Nix, Thomas O'Brien Jr., Robert O'Brien, John Olson, Miguel Pacheco, Joseph Peony, Paul Perez, David Pistachio. Angelo Pomello, Robert Redmond, Charles Reed, Homer Reynolds, Harold Roberson, Raleigh Robinson, Lynn Ross, Benjamin Russell, James Sawtell, George Sadar, Charles Seddon, Robert Service, Jackie Slimp, Kenneth Slider, Lloyd Smith, William Squires.
Robert Stafford, John Sullivan, Ronald Swanson, Frederick Tomlin, Francis Vining, Peter Vuspokis, Damian Wagaski, Billy Walkabout, Holly Walker, Francis Waters, Michael Weber, Frederick Whiteicus, Ted Wiggs, John Wilkinson, Kenneth Wilkes, Daniel Wing.
Lothrop Withington, Richard Wood, James Wright, Stephen Zardis.
Jesus Acosta, Joseph Adamski, Joel Aguano, Wilburn Anderson, James Ansley, Mark Ardelian, Bobby Baker, William Ballinger, Boyd Bandy, George Barrett, Malcolm Bauer, Walter Beese, Douglas Burnt, Eugene Bernius, Danny Bishop, Taras Boisidaj, Teddy Bunnell, Gary Berta, Chance Ron Cannon, Robert Cape, Russell Coleman, Michael Collins, Robert Conley, Donald Conan, Philip Cooper, Joseph Corbin, Russell Crossman, Don Crum, Roger Cunningham, John D'Ottavio, Thomas Davies, Robert Davies Sr.
James Decker, Carmen de Cruz, Richard Downey, John Dubroy, Lawrence Evans, James Doc Feliciano, Dennis Gazai, William Gibbs, Kenneth Q, James Gumble, Dennis Gump, Ronald Haldas, Randolph Hamlin, Michael Hemphill, Craig Higashiyama, Carol Hokinson.
Grady Howard, Glenn Howell, James Hunt, Jeffrey Hutchison, Kenneth Jarman, Alan Yerke, John Johnson, Don Jewink, Kenneth Kekic, Stanley Kugleski, Michael Leone, Louis Litchfield, Ronald McKenzie, David Marsh, Alan Maxwell, Donald McCanns.
Perry McColpin, Edward McGrath, Richard McKetchin, Charles McLaughlin, Clifford McNaught, Bonnie McWilliams, Michael Meadows, Danny Miller, Brent Miller, John Nash, Richard Nataccioni, Gerald Oland, Gregory Otto, Dominic Pinardo, Jimmy Perkins, William Pierce.
Larry Poor, Max Prentice, Larry Rodman, Jose Sanchez, Dale Sayre, Gary Schuing, Stephen Shepard, Kennedy Smith, Richard Smith, Larry Snow, Joe Spencer Jr., James Stevens, Robert Stevenson, William Straight, Michelle Trimmel, James Tyson, Floyd Vallon, Carlos Villarreal, Tommy Walker, Richard Watko, Chester Wolfe, William Wolfe, Larry Woodard, David Wright, Paul Yesk, Ronald Zieg,
Alfonso Aguilar, John Alcama, Thomas Angelos, Jerry Armstrong, William Bailey, Douglas Barton, Frank Basarab, Carl Boff, James Brawny, Thomas Brock, Gregory Brown, Mike Buey, George Carter, Paul Coffin, Richard Copenhaver, John Dawley, Herman Eagle Jr., Raymond Early Jr., Lawrence Elkins, Stephen Emery, Ronald Fazio, Richard Fifield, Larry Fines, Lloyd Frankenberry, Philip Gable, Daniel Gogol, Norman Graham, Jack Goulden, Roy Harris, Randall Hines, Charles Henry, William Herring,
William Hooper, John Ignash, Donald Isaacs, John Jones, Thomas Kane, Stanley Cates, Mark Kilty, Jerry Klein, Leonard Knotts, Ralph Culpa, Thomas Lane, Jerome Lemke, Walter Leva, George Maltby, Francis Markovic, Jack Mays, James McAllister, John McCabe, Daniel McCarthy, Roger Miller, Francis Miller, Randall Miller, Thomas Morrison, William Mueller, Kevin Neely, William O'Connor, Donald Olson, Darrell Olthoff, Hugh Palmer, Dennis Patterson, Bruce Peters, Hardy Phipps,
David Preby, Terry Prout, William Ringersma, Ronald Roberts, Jimmy Rogers, Kevin Root, Louis Rosales Jr., Teddy Roseberry, Brian Salling, Thomas Scanlon, David Scarano, Robert Schaub, Irvin Schnitzler, Jimmy Shepard, Robert Smith, William St. John, Donald Staley, Dallas Stevenson, Thomas Stockwell, Marvin Stubbs, Elwood Tipton, McDonald Valentine Jr., Benjamin Villejas, Dale Vincent, Joseph Waitman, James Weens, George Wochtowitz, Robert Yancey, Merrill Young.
Don Allen, Louis Anderson, George Angerbrandt, Howard Bars, Stephen Bellis, Dennis Bond, Frederick Brester, Joseph Bird, Henry Cardeo, Kenneth Carlson, Kenneth Carter Jr., William Castleberry, John Clifford III, Donald Clifton, George Cornelius, Francis Cunningham, Harold Curtis Jr., Dennis Dribert, Anthony Diz Imchowitz, Stephen Eves, David Fahey, George Fiddler, William Foreman, Sandy Foster, James Freud, Alan Gehring, David Chicleo, Virgil Green, Jimmy Grissom, Benny Grunn, Robert Grevemont, Alton Haynes,
Leslie Hare, David Hale, Bruce Hartman, Richard Hawkins, Lloyd Hetrick, James Henderson, Joseph Henjum, Melvin Hensley, Alan Howardell, Marshall Yeager, David Johnson, Robert Kennedy, Richard Kremvita, Kenneth Lambert, George Lanter, Robert Long, Paul Martinez, Arthur Mackenzie, James McKernan, William McMahon, David McNerney, Timothy Miller, Robert Mitchum, Lando Moore, Alan Moore, Gerald Murray, Rondell Nelson, Leon Nowitzki, Raymond Alero, Gilbert Ortega, Richard Pace, Ray Pace,
Terry Peterson, Mario Petiti, Roger Pickett, Robert Plicka, John Poley, Stuart Price, Timothy Quayne, Norman Raymond, John Reyes, Robert Reisky, Mark Rotzel, Daniel Ruffing, Gregory Russell, Joseph Salus, James Schwantes, Stanley Shaw, Joseph Shelsky, George Shukla, Jules Simmons, Michael Smitkowski, Ernest Smith, Stephen Snodgrass, Thomas Snyder, James Spence, Jess Spencer, James Schwartz, John Taft, William Tommy, Billy Tarver, Raymond Thompson, Joseph Timpano, Wayne Tissinger, Roger Van Diver, William Vossen, John Vitholkus, Kevin Walsh, Rocher Watts, Frankie Weaver, Franklin Whaley, Stephen Wilbur, Jerry Williams, Richard Williams, Donald Williams, Harry Williamson, Gary Wolfe, Douglas Wood, David Woodruff, Robert Worthley,
Joseph Amante, Michael Bashta, Lawrence Bauman, John Bertschinger, Joseph Bourgine, Warren Bray, Mark Bridges, Dennis Brower, William Brown, Dean Buell, Floyd Burchett, Theodore Cantrell, Robert Castor, Vincent Chavez, James Clifford, Dale Cody. Colin Coughlin, John Corrigan, Robert Craycroft, Fred Crusthill, Robert Crocker, Edward Crowley, Charles D'Amico, Everett Davidson, John Davis, Wesley Davis, Daniel Dennis Sr., Michael Desjean, Nicholas DeFiore, Carrie Dudakevitz, Robert Edwards, Coral Ferguson,
William Fesco, William Fino, James Flint, Robert Gaita, Marilyn Gardner, Richard Nagy, David Gould, Joseph Grakowski, Thomas Guffey, David Haskell, John Hess, Charles Hicks, Harold Hill, Richard Hilton, Daniel Hock, Everett Hogue, Manuel Huerta, Russell Jeffs, Glenn Johnson, Thomas Kelly, Donald Kennedy, Terry Kent, Robert Kidwell, Roy Knight Jr., Charlie Lane, Guy Lewis, Kirk Lasofsky, Ricky Lofton, Richard Macedo, Raymond Mura, Charles McCollum, Lonnie McDaniel.
Harold McPherson, Dennis Majeski, Paul Miller, Albert Miller, Jerry Morgan, Donald Namath, Wayne Noller, Jerry Osteen, Orville Olson, Benjamin Orozco, Thomas Posey, Gary Puckett, Francis Rabideau, Michael Reardon, Wallace Reed, Dennis Reedy, Ralph Reinhardt III, James Resch, Max Rittenauer Jr., Floyd Ritter, Donald Rosolowski, Jesse Saxton, Frank Schaefer, Anthony Shulaxi, Richard Shosky, Terry Schlosser, Richard Schrank, Harry Schumann, James Scott, Daniel Shear, Stephen Silliman, Floyd Simmons Jr.,
Raymond Sirianni, James Slusser, Vernon Smith, Kenneth Spina, Harry Still III, Russell Steitler, Robert Stittle, Rudine Thompson Sr., Eugene Vanneman, Julius Verity, William Warner, Frank Wainshimer, Robert White, Pete Winnick, Wayne Wolf, Richard Yancey, Richard Yard, Paul Yeremian, Clyde Young,
Owen Abel, Britt Adair, Patrick Alexander, Dwayne Alger, William Anson, Edward Barton, Paul Bebu, Gary Biesner, Paul Bengston, Johnny Bennett, Curtis Berner, Ronald Booth, Roy Bowron, John Brozovich, Donald Bunnell, Thomas Butcher,
Edwin Butler, Charles Carey, Henry Carter, Harry Cass, Russell Casson, Nicholas Curaro, Ovie Clark, William Cornwell, Nelson Couch, David Crook, Eldon Krause, James Gutherston, Kevin Dale, James Dare, Waylon Davis, Gunnar Davis,
Bobby DeShazer, Randall Densmore, Richard Dillon, Frederick Douglass, Michael Dunlap, Bobby Engel, Jean Vermillo, Jared Fassler, Donald Feichter, Gary Floyd, Bernard Foyle, Regis Franciscus Jr., David Frank, Richard Frederking, Bernard Friel, Richard Fronauer, Weldon Gainey, Salvador Gallo, John Gerritsen, Frederick Gersh, Claude Goebel, Victor Gorlinski, Michael Graff, Randall Gray, John Greenwood, Albert Grega, Michael Grishawick, Robert Gruber, Dennis Hammond, Charles Hanson, Thomas Harmon, James Henke.
Dennis Hewitt, Robert Hickman, Richard Hoffman, Ronald Housley, Warren Hove, Emery Hootie, Lee Hurto, William Ibow, Paul Icovidi, Alan James, Jimmy Johnson, Marshall Johnson, Dennis Kelly, Charles Kelton, Gary King, William King. Gary Knight, Robert Krofsek, Rizard Laba, Kirk Lane, Kenneth Loudenslager, Peter Laux, Marvin Lemley, Walter Lundberger, Joel Lindsay, Michael Lipka, Gary Lloyd, David Lopez, Clarence Mack, Paul Malinowski, Arthur Martin, Varney Massey.
Leonard Maxwell, Roger Meeker, Bobby Michael, Robert Michaelis, James Miller, Stanley Mills, Frederick Morgan, Robert Mott, Robert Murphy, Thomas Murray, Ronald Moody, Richard Naylor, Theodore Ney, James Nebus, James Nye, Michael O'Brien, Richard Orico, Richard Parsons III, Michael Patton, Clint Piegler, Ronald Peebles, Charles Perkins, Joseph Pettit, Paul Polifrone, Alfred Potter, Charles Powell, Paul Prebish, Edward Purdy, William Quinn, Michael Redden, James Reed, Stephen Rasheen,
Gilbert Ryder, Wilton Robertson, Henry Robinson, Hugo Rocha, Ramon Rodriguez Garcia, Larry Rogers, Roger Rawlings, Max Rosenberg, Danny Rozier, Lonnie Sanders, Roger Shearer, Bernard Schneider, Howard Schultz, Gerald Segerson, James Sellner, Frederick Short, Terry Simmons, John Scahill, John Smith, Michael Strickland, Willis Taylor, Larry Troop, Edwin Younger II, Melvin Valentine, Robert Vaughn, Jimmy Walker, Michael Walsh, Darrell Warfel, James Washburn, Dennis Weber, Larry Westerfield, William Wilson, Donald Wilson, Robert Witowski, David Wackert, Richard Zenick,
Harold Abbey, James Beck, Arthur Began, Ralph Black, Robert Blakely, Kenneth Bloom, Stephen Bloxam, James Bowden, John Braden, Howard Brent, Howard Brinkerhoff, Robert Brown, John Bruce, LaVoice Bryant, James Colicchio, Max Camberos, Robert Cameron, Richard Carroll, Larry Cole, Gary Cranor, Teddy Craven, Charles Crone, Curtis Culver, Dennis Dadak, Edward Daniel, Willard Davenport, Kenneth Defoe, Jerome Desjean, Malvin Dickinson, John Donnelly, Gene Drost, Edgar Duker,
Frank Ely, Frank Elliott, Charles Evans, Charles Everett, Brian Everman, Jack Ferguson, Luther Freeman, Donald Gardner, Marvin Gebhardt, Douglas Gilliam, Rafael Gonzalez, Thomas Graham, Kerry Green, Armand Graux, Gary Harding, William Heath Jr., John Hecker, James Hyman, Walter Heller, Michael Hill, Otis Huggins, Thomas Jacobson, Noel Janvier, Robert Jenkins, Charles Johnson, Norman Johnson, William Jordan, John Kelly, Thomas Kelly, David Costin, Richard Lang, Terry Leslie,
Larry Letterman, Richard Lighthall, Gary Loncharish, Carl Long, Joseph Lopez, Eugene Magnuson, Paul McGuire, Michael Mallory, Roger Mason, George McComsky, Richard McCraw, Arthur McFetridge, Danny McWilliams, Willie Mercer, James Miller, Thomas Miller, Joseph Mingus, Jay Morgan, Lloyd Murayama, Christopher Murphy, Michael Needham, Michael Noland, John Nichols, Michael Obrecht, Stanley Oliver, Bruce Owen, Patrick Palumbo, Vernon Park, William Pascal, Richard Peliquin, Peter Philhauer, William Phillips,
James Pickett, Leonard Potter, Clyde Price, Paul Radion, James Ralston, Michael Reagan, Gerald Regal, Vern Reynolds, George Rhodes, Carl Regal, Lester Riley, Thomas Rosebach, Robert Rossman, Nicholas Ruland, Francis Sala, Samuel Salinas, Arthur Schaffmeyer, Gerald Schneider, Larry Scott, Richard Sendler, Philip Saylor, Byron Sheldon, Sal Silva, Richard Simpson, Robert Syver, Leo Zwick, Dallas Smith, Edward Smith, Antonio Soares, Glennon Summers, Jerry Stanley, Dwight Stanley,
William Stewart, Donald Stokes, Robert Sullivan, Tommy Tankersley, J. Tarbell, Jr., William Tatum, Roger Thorne, Robert Tatey, Robert Ty, Donald Tipton, John Tomeno, Arthur Torres, William Trainer, Richard Trufant, Raymond Upchurch, Frank Vole, Frank Wojtek, Terry Wagner, Richard Wagner, John Wallace, Donald Walton, Everett Warricks, Russell Whitman, Robert Wilson, Thomas Wood, Brent Young,
Ted Aragon, Alan Baker, Mike Barkowick, Craig Barton, David Bean, Brian Decker, Paul Bell, William Bender, Wayne Berry, Nicholas Belinsky, Danny Black, Rodney Bluchel, Joseph Bohra, Gilmer Branch, Alton Brock, Ronald Brown,
Peter Brown, Kevin Buckley, Robert Burns, Robert Burris, Burton, Julio Butler, Dennis Capron, Donald Childers, Craig Colby, Gary Cole, Edward Connolly, Domingo Canelio, Albert Carrivel, Renee Coleman, D.L. Crowell, Royce Davenport,
James Davidson, Michael DeLine, Arthur Demopoulos, Gregory Deutsch, Robert Dietzman, Hobart Dodson, Joseph Donatone, David Douglas, Bernard Dunn, Wayne Eddowes, Patrick Eddy, Frank Elberson, Paul Enos, Lawrence Eschliman, Francis Fagan, John Fagan,
Michael Fennell, William Finken, Alan Feenell, Larry First, David Fisher, Lyle Fitzgerald, Dennis Furtaw, Ernesto Garcia, Gary Garcia, Jerry Goretz, Bruce Gassler, George Goebel, David Congar, John Gossett Sr., Robert Green, Morris Greenfield, Robert Grief, Richard Grenier, Leah Gwynn, Michael Ham, Edward Hayes, Robert Heckman, Frederick Hemphill Jr., Charles Hengsteller, Harold Higgs, Vaughn Hilgren, James Hollingsworth, Arthur Hotop, James Howes, James Hurt, Dennis Jacobs, Henry James Jr.
Lawrence Jantz, Michael Janis, Kenneth Johnson, Richard Johnson Bjorga, Lee Jones, Walter Keating, George Keogh, Wayne Key, Larry Kingsbury, Milton Kinney, Benjamin Kinzer, Gary Klingel, Gerald Kunkel, Gerald Kowalski, James Krause, Billy Kalhavy, Frederick Lammer, Horst Lang, Donald Larson, Ronald Lockman, Bruce Lewis, Doyle Lombard, Douglas Lowry, James McGregor, Ronald Maple, Francis Marion, Harold Marsalis, Danny Martin, Joseph McCabe, Michael McCartney, Ronald McCarty, William McGraw,
Ronald McHale, Bruce Meservey, Gregory Miller, Paul Miller Jr., Robert Modelmog, James Mogan, William Mooney, Kenneth Morgan, Jerry Mudd, Gary Nelms, Richard Nelson, Lonnie Nevitt, Charles Newcomer, Donald Norris, Barry Norton, David Omer,
Edwin Osborne, Kenneth Osterbahn, Michael Otto, Stephen Owens, Louis Palmerley, Herbert Pellone, Gregory Peterson, Jackie Petrowski, Richard Pettit, Williams Phillips, Gerald Pierce, Thomas Pianco, Paul Boyker, Michael Prestia, Alan Price, Thomas Provincial,
Duane Reed, Thomas Richards, Terry Reinhardt, Gerald Roberts, Dallas Rowe, Luis Rosas Luca, Warren Savignano, David Shad Sr., Max Scheider, Rudolfo Schatz, John Cho, Richard Siebert, David Silva, Larry Smith, Gary Saldo, Charles Souther,
Emil Stoss, Bernard Stenzel, Michael Stevens, Luther Sullivan, George Surrey, William Tainter Jr., Richard Taylor, David Teberdow, Howard Terrell, Ronald Terrian, James Terry, James Thomas, David Thomas, Herman Thornburg, Stephen Torres, Frank Urrutia,
Grady Usry, Michael Van den Einde, Raymond Vanderbeek Jr., Johnny Van Trees, Donald Varalli, Dennis Falenga, John Von Essen, John Warren, Leonard Weiss, Riley Westerfield, William Westerman, Phillips Wheatley, Carrie White, Frederick White, Michael Williams, Rodney Wilson, John Wolfe.
Herbert Abels, Bobby Allen, Charles Alverson, Ralph Angeletti, Michael Apollonia, Charles Ashley, Gary Atchison, Cleburne Atwell, Robert Austin, Stephen Bacon, Arlen Bales, George Berry, George Barton, Clinton Bassett, Gerald Bean, James Behrens, Anthony Benner, Donald Bennett, Kenneth Bennett, Donald Bennett, David Betty, James Blackstock, Felix Bonilla, Thomas Boren III, Daniel Botek, Edwin Bowman, John Brooks, Daniel Brooks, Paul Brown, Billy Carnell, Richard Clark, Marcellus Klein,
Wilbur Conway, Stephen Croft, Merle Crutcher, Philip Cummins, Stephen Cutler, Charles Dabney, Terry Dando, Philip Davis, Eugene Davis, Howard DeWeese, Kevin Delaney, Robert Delaney, Donald Dodd, Norris Dunn, Joseph Duval, Robert Ebersbach,
William Eubanks, Antonio Farinella, Harold Farver Sr., Lloyd Faulkner, Jack Fincher, Carl Fitchie, Gerald Fitzenberger, Curtis Four, Patrick Francis, Stuart Frazier, Delford Friedhoff, Michael Frontera, Robert Furlong, Arthur Gagnier, Harvey Gagnon, Ernest Gerard,
Robert Golden, Michael Guess, Stephen Gullisarian, Jerome Hall, Leroy Hamilton, Michael Hamrick, John Harmon, Jack Harney, Joseph Harris, John Haston, Gerald Heidi, Alfred Hernandez, James Hodge, Melvin Hopkins, James Horvath, Russell Jacobson Jr.,
David Jacobus, Larry Johnson, Charles Johnson, Frank Johnson, Douglas Johnson, Lynn Johnson, Robert Jones, Kenneth Camier, John Keefe, Dennis Kepler, Robert King, Ralph Kirby, James Kozmalski, Robert Keel, Ihor Kerniakwa, Paul Lamicella,
Dale Lawrence, Mark Lipman, Joseph Latursky, James Logsden, Richard Lokar, Juan Lopez, Ricky Lowe, Bobby Mabu, Charles Mack, John Mack, David Mafia, Dwight Maples, Jesus Martinez Estrada, Danny Mather, Anthony Matola, Kenneth Matsus, Daniel Morrow, Larry McDaniel, Johnny McDonald, Earl McKinley, Brian McTeague, Robert Meester, Stephen Mendel, Douglas Miller, Edward Miziezik, David Monkelis, Alton Morris, John Mulledy, Gregory Mullen, Marshall Mullins, Thomas Nagel, Dennis Netko,
Robin Newhouse, Eddie Newell, John Nix, Carol Noland, Frank Nowicki, Daniel O'Grady, Eugene Ordaz, Daniel Owen, Bobby Pack Sr., Lewis Packard, Russell Patton, William Peacock, Dallas Peterson, Michael Pengele, Charles Perkins, William Pierangeli, Kenneth Pullman, Olaf Pokrayatz, Arthur Ponte, Jerome Patak, Richard Renier, Dennis Reinhold, Joseph Reynolds, Thomas Rubottom, William Richards, Stanley Riddle, Michael Rivard, Patsy Ruth, Robert Sauer, Robert Shelton, Paul Simoneau, Danny Skirvin,
James Smith, Philip Smith, James Smith, James Smith, James Smoot, Michael Stanoshek, David Stewart Sr., Edward Swigger, John Terry, James Thompson, Paul Urban, Richard Wagger, John Wagner, Kenneth Waite, Marvin Walther, James Wark.
Dennis West, Ralph Whitman Sr., Engelbert Weatrek, David Wilkinson, Ronald Will, Martin Williker III, Lester Wilson, Joseph Wilson, Johnny Winters, Ronald Wise, Charles Wiseman Jr., Lee Whitman, Grayson Yetter, George Ubeda, Donald Zabawa, James Zimmerman,
Michael Zimmerman, James Zimmerman, Henry Zippe,
James Atkins Jr., Alan Alberti, James Albertson, Gail Alden, Thomas Alls, David Anderson, John Anderson, J. Archibald, Donald Atchley, Donald Atkinson, Danny Baca, Harold Bailey, Robert Barrett, Lawrence Bartow, Charles Bayliss, Kenneth Bell.
Robert Belterman, Lawrence Benson, John Besterfield, David B. Miller, Charles Boyette, Wazo Bozadev, Jerry Bradford, Robert Brinkley, Steve Brooks, Michael Brown, Robert Braun, David Bryson, Thomas Buckingham, John Burns, Gary Carr, Timothy Casey, Pedro Castillo, Rocky Cheney, Lawrence Chartenitz, Arthur Cochran, Ronnie Combs, Ronnie Comer, Jacob Cooter, Doyle Cothran, Carmi Davidson, Paul DeKillis, James Dean, Thomas Dorian, Daniel Drummond, Vincent Duenas, Thomas Dunnington, Ernest Easterday,
Edward Ebenhoe, Larry Eckhart, Gunnard Eskelson, Richard Evans, Herman Fayford, Billy Fairchild, Marvin Ferguson, Kevin Fitzpatrick, August Futima Jr., James Gaynor, Anthony Garcia, Ralph Garcia, Franklin Getter, Dennis Junta, Richard Gohl, James Grandy,
Frederick Gray, David Green, Frank Griffo, John Grounds, Richard Gustafson, Mark Guy, William Hacker, Donald Hama, Jackie Hankins, Kenneth Hickey, Kenneth Hilligoss, Richard Hopkins, Gerald Horton, Owen Hoskins, Dennis Huey, William Hughes,
John Jack Jr., Kurt Johnson, Charles Joyce, George Kessel Jr., Michael King, Dick Kirksey, Michael Coase, Alan Kornblum, Howard Custer, Lyle Lacey, Eugene Laban, Anthony Lee, Stephen Lembo, Robert Leon Guerrero, Daniel Lindsay, Lenny Livermore, William LaRosso, John Martin II, John MacArthur, Michael McCarthy, Paul McMahon, Joseph McNair Sr., Teddy Melvin, William Montanati, Kenneth Morrison, Rodney Moses, George Murphy, Marvin Namuth, Thomas Knock, William Norton, Larry Novak, David Ojibwe,
Kenneth Ustenink, Joseph Otrowitzki, Larry Otterback, Edward Pasilio, John Palmer, Franklin Passantino, Stephen Perlacki, Robert Parrott, William Phillips, Michael Phillips, Kenneth Porter, John Porth, Christian Polst Jr., George Raymond, Ronnie Reeves, Michael Rivas, Richard Rhodes, Doyle Richardson, James Ringquest, Norbert Rosenbaum, Anthony Salvia, John Santer, Lawrence Sauger, Bruce Skash, James Schieblein, Otto Schropp, Joel Schulman, Alan Schultz, Lauren Shea, Robert Siddick, Edward Sly, Raymond Smith,
Thomas Smith, Chester Smith Jr., Dean Speakman, Donald Spiegel, Orrin Spencer, Paul Stewart, David Summer, David Surges, Lyle Sustad, James Sutton, Roderick Swigart, Stephen Tackwell, William Tewalt, James Turwey, Billy Thomas, John Trask, Paul Tuninga, Raymond Van Gorder, William Vannersdale, Gerard Vanderhoof, Ciro Viento, John Ward, Patrick Wells, Dale White, Richard Whitney, Paul Whitten, Albert Williams, Richard Wobst, Glenn Wojcik, Paul Woods, Ronald Woolery, Floyd Worthy,
Robert Wright,
Raphael Acosta, John Agston, Michael Anderson, Ronald Arndt, Donnie Baker, Joseph Barthel, Max Baston, Patrick Beard, Michael Beaverson, Michael Belay, John Barry, James Bletner, Howard Bonas Jr., Harry Boring, Gene Bowers, Nathan Brusso Sr., Thomas Baumgardner, James Butte, James Carpenter, George Carr, Arnaldo Carrasco, Greg Church, Joseph Samini, John Colgan, Irvin Collins, John Collins, William Conroy, Robert Contreras Sr., Donald Cook, Clifton Cornelius Jr., Calvin Crabtree, James Crago,
Merlin Crippen, Thomas Curry, William Daniels, Ronald Davis, Charles Davis, John Dawson Sr., David DeCourt, Kenneth Deppening, Paul Dianovic, Terrence Decker, Nicholas Denman, Joseph DeGenova, Gary Dowler, Michael Downey, Leo Dozier, Albert Engeldo, James Estep, Joseph Finshulo, Edward Feely, Joseph Felke, Clinton Foss Jr., David Foster, Richard Franey, Russell Freet, John Gallant, Richard Giarusso, Thomas Gillis, Adolfo Gonzalez, Raymond Gazzo, Sanford Graham, Robert Gruba, Douglas Hammond Sr.,
James Hanley Sr., Charles Hanson, Harold Helms,
Harry Hensley, John Hepner, Henry Hernandez Jr., Robert Hicks, John Hoff, Ray Halloway, James Howard, Ronald Hurwitz, Maxima Jasso, Robert Jeffrey, William Jenkins Jr., Edgar Jensen Jr., Jonathan Johnson, Donald Joyner, Joseph Kane, Roderick Keenan, Dennis Kelleher, Dennis Kennedy, Irvin Kessler, Bruce Kiefer, Louis Kiefer, Robert Kitchell, Frederick Klein, Carl Nauer, Frank Kruger, George Lacey, James Lang, James Langford, Darrell Lawrence,
Michael Leos, Robert Leopold Sr., Benno Lair, John Lloyd Davies, Thomas Laporto, Paul Lorenz, Carl Malish, Ronald Maston, Patrick McClure, Peter McDougall, James McFarlane, Bruce McLaughlin, Lawrence McNichol, George Medley, Roger Melser, Fred Meyer, Jr., William Middlebrooks, Larry Miles, Dale Miller, Lewis Miller, Addison Miller, Paul Moneymaker, Joseph Moore, Edward Moore, Jerry Moreland, Dale Musoff, Jerome Ohlert, Arvel Osborne, Kenneth Pacheco, Jimmy Palmer, Bernard Parr, Tony Patterson,
Harold Payne, Jerry Pegram, Clyde Peters, Ronald Pfluger, William Pierce, Carlos Polanco, Joseph Pomila, Andrew Potter, Arthur Poulin, John Price, Dale Prindle, Olin Queen, Gennaro Quinones, Andrew Raskin, Randolph Reese, Billy Reeves, James Rayonis, David Riedersdorf, Thomas Richards, William Richmond, Stephen Ridinger, James Rogers, Robert Ross, Joseph Ruthberg, Roger Rutherford, Robert Ryan, William Sampe, Gary Sass, David Saucier, Ronald Schmidt, John Shuddy, Frank Schwab,
Leonard Shields, Alfred Scarr, Leonard Smith, Harry Smith, Ronald Smith, Meredith Smith, Ellery Smith, Herbert Smith Sr., Lloyd Southern, Malcolm Stanford, Dale Staton, Donald Stein, Randolph Straka, Michael Straw Sr., Alan Sturgis, Harold Sullivan, Charles Taylor, John Tenner, David Totorich, Clyde Van Winkle, James Vasso, Sam Weir, James Webb, James Wells, William Werner, Leland West, David White, Marvin Williams, Rodney Winchester, Donald Wallach, Walter Woltjen, Larry Yoakum,
Leonard Zaleski, William Zadazuski Jr.,
John Ball, Edward Barr, Gary Beniz, Billy Blakely, David Boyd, Dennis Brady, Ronald Brome, Joseph Bruno, Theodore Brusuelas, Albert Bumstead, Barry Cadreau, Oscar Cavazos, Louis Chappelle, Charles Chrisman, John Clary, Charles Clatterbuck, Paul Clement, Eugene Cochran Jr., Brian Cole, Donald Crow, Louis Curry, Thomas Dallas, Paul DeLuca, Anthony Demito, James Derrico, Ronald Dean, Dennis Decker, Russell Denman, Gary Denton, James Detch, James Dick, Randall Doctor.
Robert Dolan, Justin Donnelly Sr., Robert Duza, Michael Edwardson, Craig Ford, Jack Folsom, Ralph Garrett, John Geib, Patrick Gibbs, Paul Gies, Jeffrey Gordon, Leon Grainer, Edward Grusing, Frank Gunther, Lawrence Hagin, Donald Higgins, Charles Hare, Donald Hall, Ronald Halloran, James Hanson, Robert Hanson, James Hassenauer, Roger Hathaway, Billy Haney, David Heffelbauer, Gary Hendry, Charles Hess, James Higdon, Dennis Hendman, Gregory Hollinger, Richard Hotchkiss, John Howlett.
Michael Ioli, Michael Jackick, Donald Jones, John Kaner, Nikki Kleinfelter, John Koenig, Paul LaFountain, Ronald Lamboy, James Landreth, Keith Lape, Dennis LaRoque, Elmer Lawrence, Jimmy Lindman, Benedict Littlejohn, Charles Louviere, Roger Mayer, Joe Marlowe, Dennis Marsoles, Cecile Matthews, Salvatore Mattina, Joseph McCartney, Jack McCullough, James McDaniel, Harold McDonald, David McGoy, Gary McGinty, Terry McFeeters, Stephen Miesnikowski, Michael Miller, Sidney Milligan, Donald Mitchell, Robert Montano,
Robert Montgomery, Marvin Muir, Chester Mundzak, Gilbert Nauer, Earl Ostreich, Richard Osborne, James Otterness, Richard Overholzer, Freddie Owens, Cyril Pahunwai, Larry Pistole, Richard Punzel, Lauren Rickabaugh, Michael Robichaud, Gerald Rogers, Robert Sandgren, Scott Schneck, Ronald Schnepp, Jerry Selby, Roland Sisk, Lafayette Smith, Robert Smith, Otis Snyder, Gary Standard, Edward Stevens, Robert Stevens, Stephen Stoddart, Ruley Stover, Ronald Swanson, Michael Swartwood, Thomas Taylor, James Thompson,
Escom Thompson, Gary Toms, William Tignor, Robert Toland, James Toscano, Albert Travail, Joe Ursoy, Lee Vickers, Ray Wagner, Wendell Walker, Donald Wanke, Billy Ward, William Weaver, Stephen White, Charles Wilkinson, James Woody,
Terry Wright, William Yarger Sr., Albert Zuber,
Gary Abernathy, Jerry Arnold, Dinner Astick, Stephen Borchert, Ronald Camp, Richard Cree, Arnold Doty, Barry English, Frank Foich, John Johnson, Robert Krebs, Thomas McQuillan, George Munch, Richard Murphy, Billy Myatt, Ronald Niederkorn, Robert Reagan, Norman Rosendahl, Byron Selvage, Delbert Shores, Ronald Strain, Clifford Trees. VVMF's In Memory program honors those who served in Vietnam, returned home, and later died. A ceremony is held each year on the site of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. to induct new veterans into the In Memory Honor Roll. To learn more or to nominate your Vietnam veteran to be honored for their service and sacrifice, please visit our website.